Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedCommsNetworking.com. So that's information services, activities, resources for the global MedComms community, by which I'm talking about people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and associated businesses. Importantly, I run services, provide information for people who would like to know more about the business. Maybe they'd like to be work in medical writing, account management, and so on. You'll find, if you're interested in jobs in MedComms and associated businesses, you'll find lots of resources at first, medcommsjob.com. That's the place to go. But anybody in and around MedComms will find lots of information at the various websites, including at NetworkPharma TV, where there's now hundreds of videos relevant to this business. So lots to go and explore. One of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm talking to people who are working or have worked in and around MedComms, getting a little bit of a sense of their personal journeys and what they've been doing since. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Katia, who these days is a performance coach, but we met a long time ago at OCC, didn't we, Katia? So I'm just going to ask you to talk a little bit about what we were doing then, or what you were doing then, and your background in MedComms, and then you can go on to talk about what you've been doing since. So over to you, Katia.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Peter. Yeah, well, I was very much an accidental MedComms professional. It wasn't something I started in. I just started in medical publishing. I thought I wanted to publish big books, the big sort of medical books. I thought that was really exciting. I actually used to work at Churchill Livingston. They had a special projects department where they had sponsored publications. So I started to get a sort of a feel for the idea that the pharma could get involved in educational materials. And then medical communications happened to me because our department, I think they realized as a company, medical communications was quite lucrative and built out a MedComms arm out of this department. So literally one day I was working in medical publishing and the next day they told me I was working in a medical communications agency. And I have to say, I wish then they had somebody like you. This is pre-OCC days, because at that time I was completely flummoxed. I had no idea what it was, and it was quite a hard journey, sort of changing from. I'd already been working with some pharmaceutical clients because we'd been doing the sponsored, so that was good. At least I had that contact. But the whole breadth of what MedComms actually allows you to do as a service, that was the real shock to me. The conferences and all the sort of activities that go beyond just the printed word. So that was quite a learning curve, and I would never wish on anybody that way of getting into an industry. It's not the right way, so, and that's I think one of the reasons why I get so excited by everything that you do supporting people into MedComm, because actually then somebody goes in a little bit aware, understanding different roles, the different areas of the business, and then in the early 90s, there wasn't really that sort of resource to be able to find out what you were doing. And so it was quite a hard route into it. I ended up at OCC because somebody I was working with, then I got another job, and somebody I was working with then moved across, and then I moved across with them. So it's quite an interesting way to get into an industry, and it's not a way that I would recommend. And then when I left MedComms, I loved MedComms, but I'm not a multitasker. So I was in client services, and there you're really, right, yeah. All out, 10 different things at a time, and it was a stress for me. So in terms of using my strengths and using the things that I was good at, it wasn't. And that's quite a difficult thing to have to deal with mid-career. You've invested time, you've developed some skills, you get some strengths, you're confident about some things, but you're constantly having to work in a way that really, really doesn't suit you. And the one thing that I kept getting feedback was when I was working one-to-one with people, all the time I was being told, how well I was doing and how well I was doing that. And so it got to the point where I'd wake up in the morning and I'd think, maybe I could be a coach. And I think, no, there's all these reasons why I can't do it. I've invested in MedComms. And then the next day I'd wake up and I think, or in the middle of the night, maybe I could be a coach. and that went on long enough where I thought, no, actually, this is something I've got to pursue. And that then took me, I did a coaching qualification to build up some of those skills. But actually, still, I think I've used a lot of the skills and experience that I had from the MedCom days. And you realize that there's no such thing as a wasted career. You know, on one hand, you think, oh, I'm leaving behind the skills, the knowledge, and I'm having to start again. But actually, those aren't wasted. You take all those with you. So the editorial, the idea of really trying to identify the message, what are you trying to say? Is that coming across? How are you positioning yourself? That's what we do when we're doing job applications. And I did decide to focus down. I started more widely looking at performance, looking at what are you being asked to do? And then what do you need to be able to do it? But I, again, further narrowed down into job applications and interview coaching. And for me, that's just the perfect fit, because it's everything in one little capsule. You know, you're being asked to represent yourself when you're applying for a job. You're being asked to perform in a job interview. It's very unnatural for most people. That I hate talking as much and having to talk about myself as much as anybody else. Very few people really enjoy it. But actually, it is a skill that can be learned, and there are techniques that you can learn. And actually, we don't get taught them. You know, if I think about how I did my first job application, I did a CV and I sent it to everybody. In those days, I typed it out and I sent it by post. So some things have changed, but really a lot of the techniques that we use in terms of trying to summarize our careers, trying to squeeze it down onto, you know, should I have it in 2 pages? Should I have 9 point or 10 point? We start making all these decisions and actually ignore the bigger decisions, which are the ones that get you hired. So I think that there are lots of skills that can be learned and they're different skills to the skills to be very good in your job, but the skill for applying for a job is a different one. And it's actually interesting that I see that a lot of people who are very, very good at their job, and I think, you're so brilliant, how could you possibly have a difficulty doing a CV? They seem to be the ones that find it hardest to talk about the things they're really good at. It's a very weird inverse relationship. And so why should that person not have the opportunity of getting a job when they can actually learn a technique to help them to overcome that and actually present themselves in a different way?
I guess, and when I look at what you do, I mean, would you agree with this? I mean, you know, applying for a job can be quite an isolating type of position. You're not telling the people you're working with you're applying for a job. You know, who do I tell? And to have some support from somebody, coach, however informally or formally, I'm sure it must be very, very useful, because, you know, who else do you talk to, sort of thing, apart from anything else. So I think that that can be very, very valuable.
Definitely. And also all the doubts that you can't, oh, am I going to be able to do it? Is the job too experienced for me? Is it not experienced enough? You can't discuss that with you, as you say, with your employer. And family and friends, they're always very good as well. You know, they, particularly if you've got some trusted confidants that you can talk to. But actually a neutral third party who has zero investment in that, in the decision, sometimes is a very useful sounding board, because you hear back what the other, they have the benefit of ignorance. They are ignorant of all the other scenarios that might be affecting your decision. But also it's just focused on, you know, when I'm working with somebody, actually at the end of the day, how are we going to describe your achievements? How are we going to describe the evidence? And, you know, strip away all the things that you don't have control of and focus on those things that you do. And I think that's where having somebody to work with you is a really good thing, because you're being focused in a nicest, you know, pushed in a nicest possible way, focus on what you can control, rather than all the questions. Quite often when I'm doing coaching session, all these questions will come up, what ifs, and I say, write them all down, but you can't deal with them yet. You're not at that stage. And separating off what you can deal with and what you can't deal with, actually, I think is a really helpful support.
Very good. I know one of the terms you have, you know, the words you use, it's like, you know, adopt an effective job seekers mindset sort of
Yeah,
thing, you know, I mean, which covers all of that, doesn't it? I mean, that's something that I've heard you talk about.
definitely. There is, you're playing a game to some extent. You're trying to apply for a job where you don't know the criteria by which you will be measured. However much a company tells you what they're going to do, the reality is that the final decisions are made behind closed doors you have no knowledge of. This process may well be opaque, however much they describe that process. And you don't know what factors are influencing why somebody does or doesn't select you. So it's a horrible position to be in if you think you're trying to win. You don't know your competition. You don't know your competition. You don't know how you're being selected, and in many cases there will be things that might be missing, particularly if you're changing careers. So a very good example is something that quite often comes up when I'm doing my coaching sessions. Somebody will say to me, well, I was thinking of maybe approaching this application as a sort of an outside horse, as a sort of maybe something that's a bit of an unusual decision. And that's an example of a mindset. They don't realize they're doing that. But I think that mindset is not an effective mindset, because you're positioning yourself as, you're telling them effectively, I might not be a very good applicant. And there may be problems with the application, but your job isn't to tell them that. Your job is to tell them where you're good and why you're good. And then the employer will decide whether or not you're right for it. So there's one example of, you control what you can control. How do I describe my story? But also, you don't try and second guess what the employer may or may not want. You put your best case forward, and a lot of work I do is about that. You're putting your best case forward. That's your job as a job applicant. It's not your job to guess whether or not the employer will then select you. That then is out, once you've handed it over, that's out of your hands. And then your job is to do the best you can to give yourself the best chance against a competition you don't know. You don't know who else has applied.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to you talk. I mean, I spend a lot of my time with what I do, providing information, hopefully insights into the business and so on, which I think is hugely valuable. I know it's hugely valuable. People applying for a job these days have the opportunity to learn a lot about the business, the company, the individuals they're going to meet at interview and so on. But there's that other side of it. There's the mental preparation. There's the understanding how you go about what you do with the information that you glean from websites, articles, careers guides, videos and all the rest of it. And it's very interesting because it's got to be turned into something effective. It's not no good just reading the article. You've got to use that information properly. So I think what you're doing is hugely valuable. We haven't got a huge amount of time, and I didn't want to lose this as well, because I know another area of real interest for you is the sort of the challenges that people face in terms of health challenges and so on when you're working and so on. Particularly, I know you've got a particular interest in women and women's health. And tell me a bit about Bloom. You tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in that sort of area.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way, because you start off thinking, I do job applications, and I will work with all sorts of people at all stages of their career. As I've got more and more sort of feedback from people that I've worked with, and from my own experiences, from my own stage in my life as well, you start realizing that there are other things that potentially are barriers towards getting a job. So, how well you perform for women. I learned last year, about things like perimenopause, which I was completely unaware of, that I had been suffering from myself as well. That's another thing, actually, being able to talk about things. We find it very difficult to talk about any weaknesses in a professional setting. But actually, be able to help people when they're in those sorts of situations. Obviously, I can't help in any way in a medical sense, but actually understanding that something like a hot flush can affect somebody, how they perform, or worrying about how they perform. There's an opportunity to talk it through and have a plan of action, for example. What are you going to do if that happens? But understanding that is then maybe think more widely about helping people also in the later stages of their career. Careers can get quite messy. You don't necessarily have a nice flow. It stops and starts. That can also add to concerns about feeling at a disadvantage. So that's really nice. That's kind of led me to seek out other networks beyond yours, Peter, as brilliant as yours is. So one of them is Bloom, which is a network for women in communications and marketing. And I actually would encourage anybody in MedComms that, you know, we're a niche, but actually we're part of that. So it's for women, so obviously not everybody, but actually reaching out and having networks that you can draw on, I think is a really valuable thing in building your career, whether you're early stage or later on in your career when where you might need to change careers, or you might decide that you're trying to change what you do. So that's one of them. And then Albright Collective is also a women's network. That's more general for anybody. But actually, it's been really interesting being part of those two networks and seeing the activities that they also do.
Right.
So, yeah, definitely.
Okay. And we could probably talk a lot more about these things. So unfortunately, we've sort of run out of time. But I would encourage anyone watching this to reach out to you. LinkedIn is an easy way of doing it, isn't it? If they're interested in either what you're doing or indeed those two networks that you've suggested. So I'm going to say, I'm going to have to draw the line. I'm going to say a huge thank you to you for coming online. I think it's fascinating to hear the stories behind people who are in and around this business. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to ask you to give a little wave and we'll say goodbye to everybody. So bye-bye.